All right, welcome back. So we're gonna talk about MongoDB and its shell and the operator. So we already talked about NoSQL and how it's a schemaless database that we use data documents and collections opposed to table and rows. It would be normally a relational database like SQL Server, and how that is very flexible, and that how we it basically you can you don't need a rigid schema. You can change it at will, and you can do a lot of things with it. It is very dynamic. It returns a JSON object, Bison actually, but it's called JSON. What it's like a JSON format object, and it's meant to be meant for scalability. It's meant for some of these types of social media and big data, and it's because of its flexibility and easy to use, and the fact that it works so well with our MERN stack and our JavaScript technologies. It's one of the reasons why we would opt to use it in the MERN stack as a database. All right, so let's just quickly look at it. We talked about all the theory we needed to, so we're just going to actually take a look at what actually how to actually interact with it. So we'll talk about a little bit of the shell, the Mongo shell, and then some of the CRUD operations and the query operators that you would need if you wanted to work with data. And then we'll even look at some of the different cloud. There's some cloud hosting uh, MongoDB databases up there, in particular Mongo Atlas. We may take a look at that. All right, so the Mongo shell. So what is this Mongo shell? So again, as we talked about previously with Node.js and its architecture and how it has different interpreters and things like the V8 engine, the Mongo shell itself also has an embedded JavaScript interpreter. Again, V8 engine, SpiderMonkey, these kind of things. It's embedded into it, into the shell. Again, global functions, much like Node.js, it has some global objects built into it, like new date and bison size, bison size. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it, to be honest. I'll say bison. Why not? It's and object ID. So some of the global functions, they have the drivers exposed. So meaning the drivers that you can actually interact with the collections, and query against them. Also JSON-like stuff. So it doesn't require coded keys. Doesn't copy paste too much. Actually, doesn't copy paste too much. Yeah. You'll notice when you're working with the shell that some keys don't work as you would expect it. And how we'll get to that. It's Mongo shell. So it's kind of interesting. We'll look at this in a second. And what you need to do is, if you're unfamiliar with the command line, or it's a little bit scary. This is why people opt to use interfaces, IDEs, which I'll show you in a little bit, because they're much easier to work with. However, if you are a techie guy and you really like using command line and you're used to it for whatever reason, you've gotten used to that, you have a little bit more power, control over things. What you can do is you can navigate to that. You can either navigate with the command line interface, or you can actually go there and navigate it in your Windows File Explorer, or whatever operating system you have. You need to go to the MongoDB server 4.0 in the bin. In there, you'll find two executables, mongod.exe and mongo.exe. So these are interesting, actually. I didn't even know the difference between them. I had to look it up when I was looking at this. So the mongod.exe, the definition is that's the Mongo daemon. So it's the background process used by MongoDB. The purpose is to manage all the MongoDB server tasks. So if you have this installed locally, and you're wondering why you can't connect your interface, it's not working, it's because this Mongo daemon is not running. That's very important. If you don't have this kicked off and running, nothing's going to work. The mongo.exe is the command line shell, the Mongo shell that we can interact with and look at on the command line. But again, if you don't have the daemon running, whether you have it configured to run at startup automatically or you manually have to kick it off like I do, if it's not running, nothing's going to work. It's much like SQL Server or something like that running in the background. If it's not running, your SQL Studio Manager is not going to work. So let me just quickly bring up the MongoDB site. Just give me a second here, and I'm going to bring that up. All right, I'll quickly pause and restart this sometimes just so you don't see me digging around trying to bring this up and wasting time in the video. So this site here, mongodb.com, this download center, this is where you're going to go if you need to use documentation, if you need to set up, when we talk about the MongoDB Atlas, which is the cloud-based database that you can set up. I'm showing you I'm going to show you the Mongo shell that exists on my local PC. So if you wanted to, you'd come in here and you would download this community server locally, if you're going to work locally, and use the shell. And what you'll do is download that. You'll run the installer. Always come back here and check the docs if you want to know how to use some of these things. Very important if you're signing up. Just know what you're doing with the markup and the guidelines and some of the stuff we're talking about. It's always good to look back on that reference guide. So let's say you run the install. It runs fine. It's all installed correctly. As we're saying in this slide here, you navigate to the program file, MongoDB server 4.0. I have been, and you have these two interesting files here, the Mongo and the Mongo daemon, right there. So I'm gonna navigate to them via the command line. I'm already there. So the first one you have to run, because if I try to just run the Mongo client.exe, it's gonna try to kick off the shell, and it's gonna fail. Why is that? It's because that Mongo daemon is not running. So if I in another window, mongo d.exe, it's going to kick off that daemon. So now my server is up and running, can handle background processes. I can put this to the background. So I kicked it off manually. Now when I go back to the shell, I'm going to have some interaction here. So now it's started up. I can interact with let's make this a little bigger. I can interact with my Mongo shell here. So one command I'll look at another slide is just very simply show DVS. And that's going to it's going to give me a listing of what databases, what documents, collections I have. Again, they're collections. They're not tables. And I'm gonna be able to work with that. So going back to the slide here. So we've established that let it load up here. That those are the two executables and what they do. So the shell itself, when we connect to that Mongo instance and running a local host, so that default port 27017, you just need to know that in case you run an IDE like one of the other interfaces. You need to make sure that you have that port. That's the default port. You run the shell executable, which we have done. The Mongo shell will load and allow you to interact with the collections via the command line, which we just did quickly. We showed the database collection. So what we can look at is we can say the show DBS prints a list of all available databases, and then you need to switch to a database using the use command. So if you switch to database using the use commands and you show collections, that's how you're going to do it. So let's try to do this as I'm going here. I'm going to try to actually remember these commands because sometimes I forget them myself. So we're saying if we're going to use, so we're going to use game. And then it says switch to DB game, and then we're going to say show collections, and it says it has one collection called player. Great. So now that has established that we have the player, and if we wanted to say switch to another collection, switch to, I don't know, admin, and say so something happened there. Did that work? Show collections. So show player, switch to, or maybe say use admin. Is that going to work? Okay, switch to admin DB. So we say show collections. Doesn't have anything. So we're gonna actually use the game again, and we're gonna switch to DB game, show collections. So now we only have one collection that we want to look at, and if I can remember correctly, it's db.player, the collection name, and I'm gonna use a query that's called find, which is going to be empty condition, and it's going to return everything in there. So it has 3 records. It has so it returns that JSON object. It's a little hard to look at. So there's another good query option that you can have. So db.player.find, you can say pretty. And what it's going to do is it's going to actually it's going to display that in a nice name for us, a nice way. So we can actually look at that in that way. All right, so going back to this markup here, actually meant slide. We look at this again. So we use the database we switched to it, and now we're printing a list of collections. So these are useful shell commands. So I'm not going to spend too long in the shell. I'm just showing that we can interact with it natively if we wanted to. If we're comfortable in that way, we can do that. So we can go ahead and create a collection. We can insert a collection. We can insert a document into the collection. We can save or update, and then we can display the record. So inserting is the collection name dot insert, and then the fields and the value. To save or update, you can use collection name dot save, and then you give the properties you want to save. Display collection records, again the find. I gave no conditions, so it returned it returned everything. But if you wanted to query more distinctly, you can actually give it property names. All right, so if we're going back to that shell quickly, now I think I may have had some baked commands I've already done already. So let me just go back. By the way, if you are working on the command line shell and you want to scroll through some of your previous commands, you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. So I'm just scrolling back because I don't feel like typing it all out at the moment. Like if I can see if it has actually remembered. Okay, there we go. So right here, I'm doing player name db.player.insert. I'm going to insert a new guy, a new player. I'm going to insert the Macho Man, and I'm going to give him a score of 95. So what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and it's going to insert, and then I can actually go and find him again. So there he is right there. So all right, so it's returning everything. So I should be able to filter on a query on the player column. Let's see if this works, right? Sometimes it doesn't always work. Macho Man dot query. Let's see if this works. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Okay, I'm not sure actually why it worked. Let me look at that for 1 second. All right, that's because I misspelled it. Okay, easy mistake. You know, that's what happens when you're typing fast. It's not really live programming, but it's, you know, it's still you're still on the spot here, right? When the video is rolling. So I basically I misspelled that, and that's why. So when I corrected it, I actually returned that one player. So I can update, delete, I can do all the commands that is available to me. I'm just showing how you can interact with this shell. You may not want to do this because it's not as user friendly. So I'll show you a little bit of some other interfaces that you could be using. Anyhow, so another interface you could use before we get into this CRUD operation, there's something called Mongo Compass. So this is called Compass, and it's running on localhost 270117. And again, this is not gonna, I actually tried to kickstart this without my daemon running, and it didn't let me do it. So what this does is now I have a list of my collections that are on my local host. You can see admin has nothing, game has something, test has, so the one I'm looking at is player, is game with the players that we just added. So I give you the collection name, it can create some things. So if I want to dig into that collection, which we should have, what, 4 records now, click on that. Where is all my records? Is my record even there? What happened? It says 1 of 1. There they are. I'll click. Oh, see, I have a little bit of an interface here. So I click find. So now I can actually visualize the data a little bit better. So I can see in it's much better than the command line black and white. You can actually visualize this a little bit more. You have some views here that you can toggle. So let's see if I want to see the JSON object here. We have that. We can actually modify this, or there's a tabular view. So we can actually see it in a tabular view, and we can modify some of these fields if we wanted to. So that's all great. Let's see. There are some other panels here: aggregation, schema, indexes, validation. What we want is, I don't know if it's available to us here. Let me see. We want, this is not really the greatest interface for writing queries against. This is more of a managing your database and modifying the data and whatnot. So this may not, now let's see, dig into some of this here. So it's not exactly what we're looking for in terms of using operators, but this gives you a visualization of what your database looks like locally. You can connect this to Mongo Atlas in the cloud and take a look at that, and just verify your data, change your data and whatnot. And it's a better IDE than the command line or the Mongo shell. Again, your preference. I think it's a bit better. You have more control over the shell. Here's your data, your raw data to work with. So I'm going to show you another IDE that you can use for more like query building, and we'll look at that in a second. But for now, we'll just go back to the CRUD and query operators. So again, like any language, you're going to have some operations that you can create, update, and delete. That's what CRUD stands for. And query operators, right? Queries, writing queries, finding data, as you would do with SQL Server. You know, when you're selecting all from a table, where and you have conditions, and you can build out these very big queries and subqueries. It's a little different with MongoDB. It's a little bit different. You know, there's no such thing as an inner join. They have other ways of doing that. Again, because it's not strongly relationalized, right? They're very loosely coupled. But nevertheless, it still has some of these basic operations. You have an insert. It's a little blurry here. I apologize there. It's a little blurry when it actually goes full screen. But you have the insert command, which would be the collection name. Say it's employees, and you insert the document. So you have employees, insert, and then you have your JSON object inside of there with the properties. Again, with MongoDB, you may have 10 columns, but when you go to insert, um, they don't all have to be there. Maybe you only have one column, which is the name. Maybe you have an active column that when at the time of insert, it's a 1 or a 0, and then the next time somebody inserts or updates, that active flag is now true or false. So dynamically the types are changing. That's very different from SQL Server. That is so rigid, it can't handle that kind of flexibility, right? So the column may be there or not, right? The field maybe it's not a column, it's a field. It may for in MongoDB it's a field. It may be there or it may not. It changes with every insert, and that's the power of it. But also you need to write queries. There's actually functionality to check, does that field actually exist when I query it? All right, so you can also update or save. Collection name update, obviously it's going to match some criteria, and it's going to update using the set method what you need when you match name to John Smith. It's going to go ahead and set the values. Last operation is delete. Delete Mongo has two operations: remove and delete one, and remove all the documents matching the conditions, remove conditions. So one way you can do it is you can say find one. So you find that record. Once you get that record, then you remove it from the database with the ID that you have. So you can actually combine two of these operations. Important projection and query methods. So when we're talking about projection and query methods, when we're talking about projection, we're talking about the fields themselves, right? The fields. So you're selecting all of the fields, and the query methods themselves is a select kind of statement you might write. So finding projection method with helps in selecting only the necessary data you need. So db.employees.find empty curly bracket. We already saw this. When you leave it empty, it returns everything. We did that already in the Mongo shell. Find one does what it says, finds just one, a limit of one by the ID. And then pretty, we already saw that, formatted the text really nicely. A couple other ones, just so you know, there's a distinct one. It says what it does. It returns a distinct value based on the field. Limit, as we used, as we might have talked about. So you could find everything, but just limit to 2, right? It accepts the number. Skip. Skip is the same thing. It skips a certain number of documents. So if you limit one, you skipped one, I guess you get nothing. You get nothing because you limited one, you skipped it. Um, Sorting, as you know, is self-explanatory. The difference between that is you can actually, so if you notice we're chaining, right? You can chain these methods. So you find dot sort dot limit. You could do that. You keep chaining, just as you would promises if you were using JavaScript promises. So the last sort, it says find all sort. If you by the field name, and then -1 and 1. So -1 I believe is the descending and 1 is ascending. So it's a little different. That you just have to know about that flag. And the last slide, I promise, is the important operators. So again, has and or, right? You know what that is. You query with an and, you query with an or, just like in SQL Server, SQL, T-SQL, right? But here we have to use $, and it's a little bit tricky to do because you need to keep track of these brackets. And if you noticed, I actually missed a couple in my example. It has to close off that bracket there. It needs I'm missing that, so that would throw an error. So you need to have find. Inside the object, you have a $, and then if you want multiple conditions, you have to have an array that has a condition. So it says and John Smith, name is John Smith, and this ID. with the same respect when you have or the same way. You have $ or, and it's an array, and you have the two operators. And that's that for important operators, but there's a lot more. MongoDB has very good documentation. I would go there. It explains more in detail about a lot of the operations we talked about. So the CRUD operations, and it has, you know, a big list of different ones. So it will actually give you some very good examples. Like for this one, insert one, which it does what it says, inserts just one, and you have the field values in the document. And we have some read operators, same thing. So this shows the find. We have the collection. We have the query criteria, which is the age, and then we have this operator here, greater than 18 and less than 18, right? GT, LT, and the projections. So again, it says it's projecting on these fields. It's going to include name and address, and you can also exclude with -1, same as you can with sorting and descending, limit to 5. Again, more update operators. We have update one, update many, replace one. Again, same thing. You have a collection, you have a filter, and you have the set, the update action, which is the set of this field. So this is going to say update many, where the age is less than 18, and we're going to set the status to reject. We're rejecting everybody who's less than 18 years old. And again, many different operators here for delete. So those are the CRUD operators inside the MongoDB. There's a lot more to it than that. There's a bunch of other ones there that you need to read through. And I believe we were looking through, where was it here? If I can find it, query comparison. So inside operators under reference, we have all these query and projection operators. So here's all the comparison operators we have. Good documentation. $EQ equals equal. We talked about greater than, less than, sorry, greater than or equal to. We have in. So if you're to translate to SQL, select all where, you know, country is in, then a list of countries, Canada or US, you could use something like that. Less than or equal to, not equal, not in. So these are comparison operators. At the same time, we also have a bunch of other ones. So the one we're looking at would also be the logical query operators. And again, it's and, not, nor, or. So if you click on one of these, so and, it'll give you a nice little example of how to use this. Again, the syntax itself is you need to keep track of closing parentheses, so you match them up. As you can tell, like it's very, like look at them. It might help to space them out if you have multiple conditions, but there's a lot of them, right? If you don't match them up, your query is going to fail. So you have to match up this parenthesis here, this bracket, this square bracket, and so on and so forth. So what this says is go and find all the inventory where the price is not equal to $1.99 and the price exists and it's true. So so that is actually, if you a safeguard here, if you don't know, that's actually checking that that price field is actually there, because as I said, it might be there, it might not always be there. And this just will actually help handle the dynamicness that is MongoDB. All right, so let's say we wanted to do a little bit more querying and we needed some type of interface that allows us to do that. I found one that I liked a lot. It's called Robo3T. It used to be called something else, Mongo Robo or something like that, but this one's a good one. And you can connect to whatever collection you want. So this one is actually connecting to my Mongo Atlas. Mongo Atlas is the cloud hosted Mongo service on AWS. This is Azure Web Services and Google Cloud, and you can start and sign up to one for free. I mean, sign up with Google and whatnot, and you can easily get set up. Honestly, I forgot my password of the current one I'm using there, so I logged in with Google and I was able to get in. So when you get in, you'll have this dashboard, and you can go ahead and build a new cluster. When you have a cluster, basically what that is that allows you to then start building collections against this. If you wanted to connect to one of the interfaces here, say Mongo Shell, which we were working at, if you had a Node.js application or Mongo Compass, like we said, you would actually click this and grab the connection string. That's what you need. For Node.js, I believe the trick is you need to select 2.0.14, I think, for some things to work properly, especially deploying to the cloud and Heroku. And once you get that, then you copy the you copy the connection string for your Node.js application. Obviously, admin and password is only known to you that you'll have to set up. You just basically take that and modify it. Same goes for your Mongo Compass. Your Mongo Compass, you'd pick your operating system and then you'd copy the connection string. And then you can look at the collections. So here, this is not the one I'm using with the MontRobo 3T. I forgot the password, but this is going to go and retrieve all the database collections. I believe this is just a brand new cluster, so it's going to have some out-of-the-box clusters that I don't remember creating myself. So sample Airbnb, uh, supplies, training, weather. I didn't create any of those, but there are probably some sample data that you can look at and use if you want to work with some sample data out of the box, right? All right, so that is Mongo Atlas, Cloud Atlas, if you want to host it in a cloud. But what we're talking about is this Robo 3T. So when we get here, we have this interface here, and it'll log you in. And this is some other Atlas. I forget the password again. So I have some collections already there. I have something called videos, say, so I can right click and then I can have a bunch of options here. So I want to view documents. I want to just view everything in the video store. I have two objects there. If you notice, it has this collection name, videos, and find. And then when we look at restaurants, it's going to return. I have some seed data in there, so it has all this restaurant data here. If you expand it out a little bit more, you can see, there's a bakery called Morris Bakery Shop, and then there's a faux Vietnamese shop in Manhattan, and so on and so forth. Mom's Fried Chicken sounds pretty good about now, fried chicken. And anyhow, yeah, on this right panel here, you have tabular view if you want to look at this in this way, if you just for querying sake, and then we have some other view here. So you select this right now in the panel. It's a little condensed. If you just press enter, 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 you'll get a little bit of a bigger panel, as much as you want, and then you can start digging into and using some of those operators we talked about, and going back to our documentation in Mongo manual and looking at some of the stuff. We could start to actually write some queries if we wanted to, and spend some time digging into our data. So I don't really remember what this data set looks like. I just know I have a canned query already set. So if I were to just copy paste through the magic of technology, looks like I wrote that really quick. So if I go and I have that query and I run it, it's going to return to me two records that are, let's look at this here. They're looks like they are Japanese Iron Chef House and Wasabi Sushi in Brooklyn. So if we look at the collection here, it says collection name, restaurants, find. So we have the find query, and then we are checking specifically with that equal keyword to say the cuisine equals to Japanese, sorry, Japanese. Obviously, we can have and or and a whole bunch of other kind of compound multiple queries in here. And then we're doing a field projection, so we're only grabbing these fields: restaurant ID, cuisine, name, and city. So I imagine if we didn't want to, and we're sorting by the restaurant ID. So let's see if we can actually put minus in front of this. Let's see if that'll throw an error or not. No. So what that did is, although I am sorting by the restaurant ID, one means ascending, right? Not descending. If we wanted to do descending, we do -1, and that'll flip it and sort it the other way. And that did. So what we have here is we are excluding by doing -1 or 1, and we are excluding the field projections with that, and also changing the ascending descending. So we are building out, it didn't actually work. Did you notice that? It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Let's see, is it 1 0? Okay, why didn't it work? You know what? Maybe I'm just gonna remove this for now and give that few homework to see why that didn't work. So now I removed it, and what did it say? Cuisine, name, and city. I guess by default, ID always comes with it. I guess that's what it is. It always comes part of that. Let's see if I remove this. I mean, it should, now we're doing live coding here. So now if you actually remove the field projector, so that's actually what you want to include inside of it. You can control what fields are selected in there. There should be a toggle. I forget the flag. I thought it was -1, but look up on that. Anyhow, what I wanted to show was you have an interface for querying. So what we covered in this is we covered the shell. We covered that command line. We got to remember is that we got to start this Mongo daemon. If we don't start it, if we don't run this at all, a whole bunch of stuff is going to fail on us. Let's see if this will work. Now this should fail. This should fail. We are in this Mongo compass here. Anyhow, it should be failing, but it's not. For some reason, it's stuck. So nothing is working. Some things are working. That's what happens in live programming. But so anyhow, we have the Mongo daemon. We have this Mongo compass, and we have this Robo T3. The various tools you can use to actually working with MongoDB and the JSON documents. Again, it's trying to give you the exact kind of experience of SQL Server and that kind of thing, and working with this great schemaless library, give you flexibility in building your collections. The point being this, and this is the takeaway, is you need to understand these underlying collections, operators, and queries and get used to it. Because if you're going to use something like Node.js, you can then uh, you can then use a wrapper around it, a middleware, a wrapper called Mongoose, which will basically wrap all of MongoDB and all of this operators and things like that, and it adds to it. So it basically wraps it in a way so that you can use it better with Node.js on the server side. So you're working on the database level here. That wrapper will basically um, allow it to wrap the objects and things in a more efficient way for Node.js to consume. And again, like add things like validation and some of these types of things that you will need when you're building your Node.js server and your application. So to recap, Mongo Shell, the various tools that you can use to query and code against. And the next step is we want to use Mongoose, and we want to move this towards a Node.js application. All right, thank you very much.